For anyone on the job market right now, or if you're on the flip side hiring, it really feels like something massive has changed. More applications, more candidates, more overload on both sides of the market. Everyone has their favorite explanation. Is it AI? Is it just the fluctuating market? I'm Aaron Terrasas, a practitioner economist who really loves reconciling economic theory with the messy reality of real world business practice. And I'm trying to disentangle the truth from the fear and the spin to really understand how AI has and hasn't changed the labor market. With that goal, I invited my friend Amy Crook to walk me through the nuts and bolts of how AI has changed hiring from a recruiter's perspective. What's the current state of art and where there are still frictions yet to address. We're having a series of conversations about each step in the hiring process and are sharing some of the highlights here. My goal is to learn how AI is changing hiring from the inside out. Here's a little bit about Amy in her own words.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Crook, and I've been a recruiting leader for about 20 plus years, building teams across various tech spaces. These days, I lead an HR and recruitment consultancy, Stratavis. Check us out. So I've been seeing firsthand how hiring decisions, good and bad, shape the trajectory of a business. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic with Aaron.
Thanks, Amy. I'm excited to have you. Let's dive in. Hey, Amy. I'm excited to kick off this series. So let's start at the very start of the hiring process, job descriptions, and how much of developing and writing job descriptions is art and how much is science?
Yeah, I mean, it's also evolved, right? Because we've seen jobs evolve. People are in a position where they're trying to combine skills that haven't necessarily been combined before in their effort to perhaps save on headcount budget. So it's become definitely more complex, I think, for recruiters to go out there and find the talent that they're looking for, while simultaneously, I think with there being so many candidates on the market, they're seeing jobs that they wouldn't necessarily apply for in different times, but they're seeing that they match maybe 50% of the requirements and they think that it's worth throwing their hat in the ring.
As a recruiter, do you typically draft the job descriptions, or is that something that comes to you from the hiring manager? To what degree do you draw inspiration from what's out there, or even throw it into an LLM?
Yeah, so all of those. The hiring manager puts together the core needs for the role. Where talent acquisition step in is making sure that that job description is easy to read, and that we're not over-indexing too much on the requirements because the last thing you want to do is read a job description that or a job advertisement that has 100 requirements. You have to simplify it to the core needs of the role, and that's where the TA partner really engages with the hiring manager to drill down on what's really important. And then, yeah, if you don't have a brand voice that you're working with at your organization, I'm sure LLMs are super helpful for just making sure that it is polished and free of errors. But with those LLMs, obviously, if you have your own brand voice, it's not going to be able to replicate that every time for you exactly. So the like in roles that I've had, we've had brand guidelines and definite like predetermined narratives that we want to share as part of the advertisement so that people get a good feel for the culture. But I think the bit that's getting a bit sticky right now is in those core requirements that people are looking for somebody to come and solve all their problems with one headcount.
Yeah, it feels like this kind of the ambitiousness of job descriptions is a little bit pro-cyclical. It moves with the business cycle. When the labor market
Yes.
softens, we see job descriptions get more ambitious, and obviously, kind of when it tightens, kind of the job requirements get a little bit
Much more
narrower.
flexibility. Yeah.
But this writing and editing is obviously a core competency of LLMs and something that kind of they're already used widely
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, they can tighten things up really nicely and make it more succinct so you're not waffling on and people aren't having to read a job description that's 10 pages long.
I think part of a lot of the conversation in recruiting recently has been about identifying adjacent skills, skill-based recruiting, not indexing necessarily on a person's job history, but kind of on their core competencies, what they say they can do. To what degree
Mhm.
have you ever seen LLMs or kind of identify adjacent skills or skills you hadn't thought of?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is helpful if you don't have a framework already in your organization that describes the behaviors that, make people successful in your organization. You can put in there a whole list of role responsibilities and ask your LLM to give you the core competencies required, what kind of backgrounds would be appropriate to transition into this role. Um, and then it'll give you a good starting point when it comes to going out to the market and seeing what candidate would be a good fit for the role that isn't necessarily somebody who's done this before, which I think is really helpful as we're starting to see jobs come online that are brand new,
Mm.
particularly around the AI space. You're not going to get somebody who's got, 10 years working in AI. So like what is the background and career path that somebody should have had that will translate into them being really effective in your space? And it might not be your straight up, software engineering background. There might be other components to that individual's skill set that become more meaningful as you're dealing with a tool that can do a lot of the legwork for you.
Yeah, I noticed back this past spring, Google released a job search and career exploration AI tool, and I was playing around a little bit with it, and as I understand it, it's modeled on job descriptions and the skill sets in job descriptions, and then people's resumes and kind of adjacent skills that they have. In some ways, it was very cool. You could type in kind of your current job, your job history, kind of your
Hmm.
skills, and it would identify other career paths for you. And so, again, on the surface level, it was very cool. I think the more I played with it, I was like a little bit disappointed. I was like, well, this is all obvious to me. I knew this. There was
Yeah.
nothing kind of original or unconventional in there. And so, I think my read of at least of these skill exploration tools, it's still, it's a curiosity still. It's not necessarily something that's,
Hmm.
um, you know, changing people's minds in any way.
No, I don't think so either, because one plus two is always going to equal three. So,
Right.
there's some things that are just going to stay the same. I think it's great, though, to have something like that that maybe doesn't focus on your career history, but more like your passions, interests,
Mhm.
your needs from a workplace environment, your needs from the work that you're doing. And then that could help translate for somebody early in career, like what they should be focused on. But yeah, it's not going to, wave a magic wand and be like, actually, we've decided you are going to be the next Oscar-worthy actor, and so take away this resume and you'll get hired in Hollywood tomorrow.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
It's in some ways it's very obvious and and maybe kind of that's useful to some degree, but maybe we should be thinking about it instead of as a career exploration, more as like a career coach
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
help you think
And
through
that's the
that.
key, like using it in the right way.
Mm.
It's not gonna solve everything because, and this is my favorite phrase that I like to say, it really is toddler technology and we have like big people problems.
Yeah,
And so
love
where
that.
it can be beneficial, that's great. Like let's use it to create those efficiencies. But you still need to have developed at some stage in your life critical thinking skills to be able to even prompt an LLM to like come up with something that's going to be usable. Like, no, is it's and it's great. Don't get me wrong, it's getting better and better every day. And I think that's great. I just the application of it, especially in the recruitment process, has to be really well thought out because the success of an organization is built on their people. And so you have to be really mindful about how you're improving your process. Yes, for time efficiency, yes, for cost, but not compromising on making sure that the quality is there. And it's great that it can pull together a nice advertisement for you, but then what?
Yeah, you just made every liberal art graduate's heart flutter by saying critical thinking is still going to be useful in the age of AI. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the next stage, kind of in this funnel, in this recruiting hiring process. Let's talk about
Hmm.
sourcing.
Hmm.
Obviously, sourcing is maybe at a cyclical low right now as AI is coming online. It just doesn't feel like there's necessarily a huge need for a lot of sourcing, perhaps beyond some niche roles. how do you think, AI is being used, could be used in sourcing candidates?
I mean, I'm going to be very like honest right now.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
I would be shocked if there are any talent acquisition teams outside of a rare few that are sourcing, period. I think they are overwhelmed with applications for their roles. And it's interesting because if you did do proactive sourcing, then you would be in more control of your pipeline. You would be more in control of your volume. Um, but I don't think that that is a lot of organizations' pathways from what I've seen recently. It's more about get the position out there, get it posted, and then hope to plug in some technology that's going to help them deal with the mass influx of applications that are sure to follow. So, I mean, I've done a couple of things from like sourcing when it comes to LLMs, and I've also seen some of the downfalls of it because it's pulling everything, right?
Mhm.
So say you put in your job description and you say like give me three candidates or give me some candidates that will match this role just as an experiment, you'll get candidates back, like you will, but there's no verification there that that person is actively looking for a new role. There's no verification that that person's actually in compensation bands that you're working with. And also sometimes the information is super out of date. Similarly, on the other side, when I was sourcing roles, I tried to use an LLM to see what open jobs were out there. And I got a couple things locally, and I reached out to the CEOs. Um, and they were like, oh, we filled this job a year ago. And I was like, oh, so, not perfect.
Mhm. Okay, so it seems like just the timing's wrong for sourcing and LLMs given the market and potentially some technological barriers. Um, can you
Yeah, they
imagine
haven't figured it out
beyond the
yet.
cycle any applications if it improves?
I mean, I totally can, but it's going to be really reliant on what else is in there. And obviously, the more people use it, the more data it's going to have, the more it's going to be able to, pull more accurate, up-to-date data. Like
Yeah.
that's just how it works. Um, However, the little piece in the middle of, making sure that this person is interested within budget, um, that you have, that connection that you make to have a conversation with somebody to understand their purpose, their drive. You can't really replicate that with AI, and I don't
Yeah.
know that you ever will.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on that. As you kind of you're talking, my mind is kind of from the quant perspective starting to spin. And, you could probably get some predictive analytics around the likelihood of being in your comp band, the likelihood of being open based on,
Right.
kind of some model of how, of whatever factors. And so, maybe that's kind of an area for exploration in the future. Um, kind of Okay, so we got the JD done.
Mhm.
Kind of we've kind of potentially sourced some candidates out. It's out there in the world. Let's flip to the candidate side. Kind of
Uh,
obviously a big use case is resume, cover letter, writing, editing, optimization. How prevalent do you think this is? Do you think it actually helps? Is it ever a problem? Should they disclose kind of whether or not they've used it? I think these are some of the questions that, people I talk to and kind of I see around the world are grappling with.
yeah, the disclosure piece is huge. I think when you're using it for a resume, I don't think that's necessary, like per se. I think definitely like some versions of communication or, there needs to be some like if when you're asked like a free question in an application form,
Mhm.
how easy is it to just put that question into your LLM, spits out an answer, copy it in? But I wonder if people realize that that's probably spitting that same answer out for every single person who's doing the same thing as you. So it's a really quick way to see who's phoning it in and just putting that in there. And there's something to be said about the capability of AI to polish up what you're saying, but those anecdotes should be your own,
Sure.
and this goes back to what I'm saying about how important I think like the critical thinking skills are. And, don't just turn your back on your decades of experience that made you who you were for a quick fix. Like the thing that's going to get you through the door is the things that you've done and the things that you've made happen with your ideas. And if you want to use the LLM to make that, succinct or, a little snappy, whatever you want it to make, whatever you want, that's fine. But it needs to be your story, your journey, because I can only imagine the amount of applications that TA people are going through at the moment, and they've just got the same answer over and over again because people have just copy pasted.
Yeah, I
It's not good.
mean, no one's asking us to disclose when we use spell check.
Right,
I feel
right.
like that's kind of accepted. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember kind of reading the story of one professor who kind of, does this exercise at the start of the semester with his undergraduate students.
Hmm.
He, asks the students kind of the first assignment to respond to a prompt. The prompt is kind of very generic, and the week after it's due, he kind of puts up all the responses
Yeah.
on on like a slide, and you can just see kind of like the same language reappearing in
Yeah.
places, and he doesn't say anything. He just says like, hey, this is kind of the reality of the world we live in. AI makes us better. It should, but it's it also kind of has its limitations. And so I think kind
Hmm.
of for me, kind of the light bulb moment was, just realizing um, in this world of lots of applications, obviously you want to get past a filter, but being an
Yeah.
outlier is what makes you
Yes.
stand out. You want to
Yes.
avoid reversion to the mean, and models, often revert us to the
Yes.
mean. So,
Yeah.
um,
No, I couldn't agree more. What you have learned, what you bring to the table uniquely is going to make all the difference. And I when you said like AI makes us better, like I was like, like it makes us more efficient. But
yeah.
our learning, our experience, like
Mhm.
that's what makes us better. And the whole idea is that you take the two, the
Mhm.
person and the computer, and you marry it together and make
Yeah.
something that you never could do on your own. Both sides, the computer could never do it, you could never do it, but together you bring something to the table that's better than the individual.
It does feel like that we're moving a little bit toward a world of like a cat and mouse game when it comes to AI use in applications and resumes and cover letter
Hmm.
writing. My mind as an economist goes to lessons from regulatory economics where governments or businesses put a rule in place and then kind
Hmm.
of actors find a way, you know, around those rules. And inevitably kind of the more you put in rules, kind of the more there's an incentive to find workarounds. And so it just feels
Hmm.
like an area where there's just going to have to be a constant maintaining of that frontier of where practice is. So
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's really sure where that line is, though. I think everybody's just, still
mm,
figuring it out. The thing that I would encourage that I've seen, even at sea level, is that people tend to go down to one of two paths. One is just like abject panic that their life is over and their job is going to be eliminated and it's the end
mm,
of the world. And then the other side of it is that they're so afraid to be perceived as, not forward thinking, that they're just so into it that they're like, hey, I can do everything. Like I don't even need to be here. Like it's just there's a middle ground. Like middle ground is always best ground.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think kind of more broadly on AI beyond this conversation around recruiting and hiring and applying, it feels like there's like the kind of the hype cycle and kind of it has high highs and low lows, and the long-term
Yeah,
reality ends up kind of being somewhere a little bit short of the highs, better than the lows. Um,
totally.
so I'm glad we can kind of both agree to have moderate long-term perspectives on this.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, um, kind of, let's kind of think about like the end of the first chapter of kind of this process.
Hmm.
JD is up, kind
Hmm.
of candidates have applied. this is,
Mhm.
it feels like is really the challenge and the rub right now is how do you begin to sift through all of those applications that you received? And it potentially it feels like there's enormous application of AI here. It's been used for a long time. You know, the predecessors of kind of what we currently call AI have been used for a long time in this space. You know, let's talk about kind of filtering kind
Mhm.
of the applications that you do get, and of course, kind of one of the most controversial kind of lightning rod topics in this space is applicant tracking systems and ATS filtering. So
Mhm.
could you just talk a little bit about how do you begin to filter through those applications that you receive? What application of AI is there?
Yeah, so I think be careful what tool you use. Not saying anything too controversial about what's going on currently, but I think you want to be really thoughtful about the tool that you use. Um, I think there was a, a perception that having a tool that, learned your behaviors and learned your preferences was like a good thing, but that's not true when you're talking about hiring. You have to be objective. We've just, really put a lot of time and effort into creating diverse workplaces. And so if you put, one person's slant on what good looks like for all of your applications, that seems really dangerous. But there are tools that will be like that next level of those like ML tools that you were talking about, like
Mhm.
before, that will just be able to more intelligently read the resume and read your job description and see where there's a match. And it's, the next level of a keyword match. It's more thoughtful than that, but it's not
Mhm.
making any assumptions and it's not going on previous preferences. And so there are tools that will do that. That I have personally implemented and seen a lot of success with. Um, I started small with my team, maybe just discounting the bottom 25%. But where it landed in the end was that the top 25% of applicants were good matches. And obviously, that requires a lot of like going back and looking through every single resume and making sure mistakes aren't being made. Um, but that is to say, it's no different than I think back in the day, it used to be called killer questions, where they'd ask you like a question, and if you didn't give the right answer, you got an automatic rejection. So I don't think people should feel, if you've applied for a role and an AI tool has made an assessment that, your match isn't right for the role, I don't think people should feel too disheartened about that at this present moment in time, because people are applying for a lot of things. So my experience on the other side was that we were getting a lot of applications from people that weren't necessarily a good fit. And so rather than the recruiter having to spend a lot of time going through those applications individually, they could focus on the candidates that were appropriate and getting them through the process in a timely fashion. What I'm seeing a lot of at the moment, though, is just applications going in, nothing coming back out. Like it seems like a stalled process that through the Glassdoor and Indeed merger. Obviously, I know a lot of people that are on the job market right now, and they're all experiencing the same thing. Like your application just goes into a black hole, and so what? Why? Like there's tools out there to help, and also just there's ways to be thoughtful about your process. Um, so I don't know how that's really benefiting the job seeker right now because it feels like it's not it's had the opposite effect that the process is almost in pause mode. Maybe it's because they're implementing something or changing something and it's taking more time. But I've there's no reason why when your application rate is as high as I've seen them be that you shouldn't be closing requisitions in a timely fashion. So if anything, I it feels like it's had a negative impact on that piece of the process at the moment.
Yeah,
And
I
maybe
mean,
that's just because it hasn't come to fruition.
this lack of a closed loop is common, factor that candidates complain about, and it feels like, ironically enough, AI should help us close those loops more
Yeah.
efficiently. Why do you think? What is the motivation for not providing any response?
Uh, so I think a lot of talent acquisition teams have been really trimmed down in the last couple of years. So they're probably very understaffed. And I think honestly, it's just a little bit of poor direction, like from the organization, because it to me, after being in talent acquisition for 20 years, the process itself isn't super complex. But doing the individual pieces well requires a bit of thought, time, and effort. And so, yeah, I think trim down teams, high volumes of applications, lack of familiarity with the newer tools that are on the market. It's just the perfect storm for people to be in limbo for longer than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily buy the application volume point because, again, AI should address that, but I definitely buy kind of the inexperienced, kind of understaffed, under-resourced teams kind of point.
But
So,
if you've got somebody who in procurement, or because companies are made up in such different ways, but if you've got somebody in procurement who's decided the perfect tool to support the talent acquisition function in getting through resumes, and then they've tried to implement it and it's not working at all for their process, that can have an impact,
yeah.
like, so I think, yeah, I get you, like technology shouldn't be a blocker, but to me, it almost feels like it is because they're either making, you know, decisions that aren't aligning with their business process, or they're just stuck in like analysis paralysis, maybe trying to
Mhm.
decide what tool. Because I hear this a lot from leaders too, that they're like, well, if I invest in this tool today, something better is going to be on the market tomorrow. And it's like,
Sure.
you can't live your life like that, though. Like,
Mhm.
you have to make a decision and move forward.
hmm No, so maybe it sounds like from your perspective there, it's like a little bit of an education piece when it comes to the actual budgeting folks and the
Totally.
CFO's office. Going
Yeah.
back to something you said a moment ago,
Mm.
if a candidate feels like there's been a mistake, an error in kind of the automated rejection, can they do
Mhm.
anything? What do you recommend folks kind of do in that case?
Yeah, I mean, I recommend giving feedback every time. If you feel like the process hasn't gone well, give some feedback. And not to the recruiter necessarily, but it's so easy to, people are going to be like, boo, when I say this. But it's so easy to go on LinkedIn and see who the like head of talent acquisition is, or the
Mm,
CHRO or CPO, and just be like, hey, by the way, I applied for this role. I didn't hear back for 3 months, and then I got a rejection, but
no.
I'm a good fit. That sometimes what happens at grassroots doesn't always make its way up to the top, and so it might be a lack of exposure to the problem situation.
hmm
Um, I have to say, my team were perfect angels, so I never received these kind of emails myself. But I've heard of it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because the market and the the workspace has changed so much in the last 2 years. It felt like at one point a couple of years ago we went too far the other way, where employees were running the show like
hmm
completely. But like now it's gone to the point where it's miserable to be looking for a job because you've got no recourse if you don't feel like the process has been going well. You don't it feels like you're taking all your power. And then honestly, when I think about the people that stay behind in these companies that have been slashed and slashed and slashed, I don't think they're having a good time either. So, it's just not good to be in the workforce period, I don't think at the moment. Again, doom and gloom. But back to your original point, give the feedback. If they care, they will want to know. If they don't care, you haven't lost anything.
I think some candidates are concerned about adverse consequences for future attempts with that company. Do you think there's any adverse consequences if you provide candid
No,
feedback?
praising is everything. I mean, if you give feedback and you're like, really, I want to speak to the manager, this is not acceptable type of vibe, then yeah,
Yeah.
that's not going to go down well. But just like, hey, I just wanted to share with you my experience.
Yeah.
And, I just thought you might like to know. And, I still feel very passionate about your organization, your brand. I would love the opportunity to work with you in the future. Um, just wanted to share my feedback with you.
So maybe run
Um,
that email through ChatGPT.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Make this sound friendly and non-threatening.
Right. Yeah. Cool. I mean, but th this point though, kind of you noted the market swinging in one direction a couple of years ago, and it feels like swinging the other direction kind of more recently, at least in
Mhm.
some sectors. How do you think that that changes the calculus around um, kind of candidate experience and kind of the degree to which AI plays a role in shaping that?
Yeah, I mean, I have always been somebody who felt very passionately connected towards the brand of an employer. Being in a talent acquisition function, you're kind of on the front lines in that regard. You're out there meeting candidates, selling the company, selling the opportunity, and hoping that they feel engaged enough that they want to move forward. Like that's the base of our role is to advocate for the organization and why you would want to work there. What seems to have happened now is no one's doing that. It's less of this is a two-way street. We're going to have this conversation. I'm going to be assessing you, but I know that you'll also be assessing me to see if I'm the person that you want to work with. That's just not the case anymore. And I think, there's a couple things at play. One is that some people have been on the job market a really long time. So when you have gone without compensation for 12 plus months, your tolerance for these kind of shenanigans probably goes up because you're like, well, they might have kept me waiting 3 weeks between interview stage, and they might have just turned up and asked me the weirdest questions. And I've heard some weird things. Hiring managers meeting candidates for the first time and without any introduction, without any, talk about the role or them, tell me what your biggest failure was. And it's like, what? And I've heard that multiple times. Who's going around telling people that this is the new way to find out if somebody's a good candidate? Like, it's not. You're putting somebody on the spot, you're making them super uncomfortable. They definitely haven't prepared for that. It's your job to sell the organization as much as it is for them to sell their experience. But that just seems to have dissipated, and I think there's a perception from the organizations that there's so many candidates out there they can get what they want. Yeah, we'll advertise this job. It's really three people's jobs, and we're going to pay a fraction of what even one of them was worth. And let's just see what we get.
Yeah.
And they're getting people. So, my advice, as hard as it is, especially when you're in that position that you have been looking for a long time, is do not forget your worth. If
Mm,
nobody applies to these jobs that are paying terrible compensation and wanting somebody who's super senior level, they're not going to be able to hire them. And just think about what you're signing yourself up for. Yes, you're going to get a check. And I understand that's super important. But how long is it going to be before you're looking for another job if you've gone to the type of organization that's capitalizing on people's misery this way? Like, I I don't know.
yeah.
But I know you and I talked about this like quite a bit before, and I'm like, it's just not right. Like, why would you want your company to be represented like that? Why wouldn't you care? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, no, if they do care.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is, yeah, as we've talked about this extensively over the years. And, I
Yeah.
think kind of as in putting on my economist hat, kind of markets have a clearing price. And, there's an elasticity. And, if there's outside options for candidates, kind of all that stuff matters. And if there's not, it doesn't matter. So, I think maybe it's a cyclical moment where candidate experience kind of matters less. Maybe it's a structural moment. Those are debates for a different day.
Mm.
But I think it is an important kind of recognition that at this moment in time, kind of, candidate experience feels less important. Perhaps there are consequences of that, perhaps
That's
there are
putting it
not.
mildly. I was
Yep.
feels not important at
Um,
all.
yeah, no, totally. Um, as always, kind of Amy, this has been kind of really helpful, and we're going to kind of continue these conversations with kind of future episodes. As I think
Mhm.
about what we've talked about the past 30 minutes or so, top of the funnel, when it comes to description development, kind of sourcing, recruiting, kind of applying, and that early
Mhm.
initial screen of candidates. A couple things I take away is that a kind of um, application, kind of at least application of AI in this area is still kind of very hands in the wheel. So it helps, it supports, but kind of ultimately is still human discretion and human decision making. I think the second thing that I take away um, is that when it comes to kind of filtering and feedback, there's in some ways an organizational gap where AI should be making this better, but it's not yet. Perhaps because of how organizations are applying it. It's not the recruiting team. It's someone else's fault in the organization, so to speak. And I guess the final takeaway that I've had from this conversation is that it's really hard for me not to say process as opposed to process. But that's we'll see what happens next time. As always, Amy, a joy. We'll continue the conversation.
Sounds
So,
good. Thanks for having
bye.
me.
Thank you.
Bye.